Want help to grow your business? Download BRiN, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit BRiN.ai or search the App Store today.
G'day there, Peter Moriarty here, back with another episode of Business in the Cloud. I'm really excited to have you here today because we're going to cover one of the most important questions for you as a business owner, and that is how to choose the right hosting platform for your business website. Now, if you're like most business owners, you've probably got a business website on a server sitting somewhere. Well, where exactly is that server? How does the technology work in the background, and how do you make the right choices? It's quite often that you're led by either your IT person or maybe just Google search results or blog posts on how to make the right decision and the right choice around your website hosting. So I'm going to try and help demystify things for you and get you back in the driver's seat so you can make the right decision yourself. So let's get into it. Now, you've got a problem, and that problem is, well, where do I put my website? What is web hosting? It's kind of a weird thing. It's, servers sitting in a data center. Is it in the same country as me? Is it not? Is it somewhere else? Well, we're going to go through some of the basics of web hosting, like what are the different types of web hosting and how do they work? What are the advantages and disadvantages? We're also going to go through who do you need on your team to get your business website hosting sorted. So let's go through a quick summary of what we're going to cover in this episode. So first up, we're going to cover, well, what are the different types of website hosting? The different types range from VPS, shared hosting, cloud hosting. How are they different, and what are the different advantages of each one of those? So next up, how the location of your website host can affect your Google ranking. Now, Google have told us that where your website is hosted in terms of the actual location, well, that can actually affect how you appear in search results and how high up your website shows up in their ranking. So that's an important one for you. Next up, how website hosting speed affects your website conversions. And what we mean by that is people landing on your web pages, how likely are they to convert into a customer? Because as you know, we've got very, very short attention spans these days. So we're going to go right into that. And then the importance of backing up your website. Super, super important, how that works, why it's important, and how you cannot get caught out by your web host. And finally, who do you need on your digital technology team? So who should you have on your team to make sure that your website runs well and the hosting is servicing you well? So let's get started. You're watching Business in the Cloud. Now, the different types of website hosting vary. Website hosting has been around for many, many years. Since the internet was started, well, the first thing that had to happen was websites had to be hosted somewhere. And hosting is kind of like the background of how everything happens. Now, I've got a slide here of how you probably imagine website hosting to look like. This is the inside of a data center, and sadly, some data centers do look a little bit like this. That one's a little bit messy. But the reality is that a proper website host with a reputable business is going to keep your website looked after, well protected, and is going to allow your site to be well served to your customers. Now, there's different kind of websites that you might have with your website hosting. You might be using a completely managed service like Wix or maybe ShareSpace. There's lots of different services where you can just create a website online and they take care of all of the hosting for you. But we're going to be talking more specifically when you have your own website that you're in control of. Maybe you've engaged a web designer or web developer to put the website together for you, and you might be using a platform like WordPress or maybe Joomla. This is what we're going to be talking about is, well, where do you put your website and how do you manage the hosting? So let's get into the 4 different types of website hosting. There's shared hosting, VPS hosting, dedicated hosting, and cloud hosting. And we're going to go through each one of the differences right now. So first up, let's start with shared hosting. Just imagine shared hosting is a bunch of people crammed onto one server trying to get access to the same resources. Now, this is typically used for more kind of hobbyists, basic users who are just getting started with their first website. If you're a serious business owner, shared hosting is probably not appropriate for you. The reason for that is with shared hosting, typically what you'll find is that if you have a noisy neighbor on the shared hosting platform, well, they can cause your website to slow down as well. What that means is that if you're getting a lot of visitors to your website, well, you can only get the amount of bandwidth available to your site as the server allows. Think about lots and lots of people in one apartment building, and if one person's making a lot of noise, well, it's going to be a little bit noisy for everyone there. So shared hosting has its uses. If you've got a hobby blog, or maybe you're just starting out with your business and you want something really basic, well, shared hosting is typically very, very cost effective. You might only pay $3, $4, $5, or $10 a month for a shared hosting plan. LAN, which means that you're on the same server with potentially thousands or tens of thousands of other websites. Now, there's nothing wrong with that if you're bootstrapping and you're just starting with something like the real basics, but as you grow and as your business website becomes a more important asset for your business, well, it might not be exactly the right choice for you. Let's move along to the next level of hosting. Now, VPS hosting. This is gaining popularity because VPSs give you dedicated resources for your business. What a VPS is a virtual private server. And what that means is you have your own box, effectively, a virtual server box, which allows you to host your website on a place where you're not going to get affected too much by noisy neighbors. Now, what this means is, in effect, that if your website receives a lot of traffic, well, you're only going to be constrained by the resources allocated to your virtual server. Now, pricing for a virtual private server might range from $50 a month right up to $200 or maybe even $300 or $400 a month. Depending on where you are in the world, you might have different pricing for that as well. But a VPS, the important advantage is that it gives you dedicated resources. Now, some VPSs still have drawbacks, and the main drawback of a VPS is, well, it's still a virtual server. If there are other VPSs running on the same server as yours, well, you're still fighting for the same kind of resources in a way. I've got an image here which illustrates how VPSs work. As you can see here is we have one main server which has multiple VPSs on top of the main server, and the main server is called a host. Now, if there's a problem with the host, all of those VPSs will find themselves unavailable. And so you're still relying on a box sitting in a data center somewhere working properly for your website to actually be online and available. So that's the downside of a VPS. Even though you do receive dedicated resources with a VPS, well, you've still got the unreliability potentially of the host box going down and then your website being offline. And remember, your website won't be displayed to any of your customers until that host comes back online. And that's the responsibility of the web host that you're paying money to host your website, but it could take them an hour or maybe even multiple hours to get that host box working again. All that time, your customers are wondering why your website's down and offline and they can't do business with you. So a VPS has some advantages over shared hosting, but it's not quite the best in breed for hosting your website. Let's move on to the next option, dedicated hosting. Now, this is popular for businesses who have reached a level of success where they know that they're doing a bit more business through their website, and that important asset, well, it can't really afford to, go down or become unavailable. Dedicated hosting gives you your own host. It gives you your own box sitting in a data center with your own dedicated resources, not shared with any other VPSs or any other virtual hosts. And typically, these are a little bit cheaper than just going with a high-performance VPS. Now, dedicated hosting gives you better performance of your actual website because VPSs can kind of have to share a few of the resources with each other, whereas a dedicated host gives you your own machine. You're never sharing with anybody else. Now, dedicated hosting can range from sometimes as cheap as $50 to $100 per month, right up to $1,000 per month for really, really big services in the dedicated hosting space. Now, what this is going to allow you to do is have one place and dedicated resources just allotted to your website. And this is what it looks like. I've got a slide here which shows a dedicated server. And there's literally one computer, and this is a server machine which sits in a rack, and that's actually slotted into a rack of other servers, and that's dedicated to your business. Now, dedicated servers do have some of the same drawbacks that VPSs do have. That means that, well, if the hardware fails, your website still might not be accessible. The reason why dedicated servers are popular is because for the performance that you get, they're quite cost effective. You can pay $100 to $200 per month, get access to a dedicated server, and what that means is you have the dedicated resources, but you still have the drawbacks of, well, that hardware might fail and the website might be offline for some of your customers. So while dedicated is a step above both a VPS server and, of course, shared hosting, well, it's still not the best option out there for your business. That brings us to the final option, and that is cloud hosting. So think of cloud hosting as a mixture between the benefits of a VPS, being able to control your server, having dedicated resources, but also the high performance of a dedicated server. But what cloud computing has as an advantage of all of these different options is high availability. What cloud hosting allows us to do is have a VPS or dedicated resources, but have that spread across multiple host computers. Now, what I mean by that is there's more than one host hosting your website at any one time. That means that in a data center, there might be 3 or 4 computers that are there with a copy of your website. And if any one of those were to fail, well, you still have redundancy because your website has another place where it's hosted. And so what cloud hosting gives you is super, super high uptime. Even in the face of a hardware failure, well, your website is still going to be up and available to your customers. Let's have a look here at my slide on how cloud hosting works. As you can see, as a comparison to traditional hosting, whether it's shared hosting, a VPS, or even a dedicated server, if the host server is offline or becomes out of order, well, then your website's going to be offline. But with cloud hosting, because there's multiple servers serving up a copy of your website at any one time, if just one of those machines or even multiple of those machines fail, well, there are still other copies of your website where the website is being handled and being served. So some of the advantages of cloud hosting means that even if you're in an environment where you have VPS hosting or if you have shared hosting, if the underlying infrastructure is cloud hosting, well, what that means is that you still are safe from small amounts of hardware failure for your business. It also means that, well, you can still get a high-performing website and a super speedy response time on the infrastructure that you're using and the service provider that you're working with, but you get the guaranteed uptime of cloud hosting. Now, that doesn't mean that your website is completely immune to any form of downtime. You may have coding issues, you might have a problem with an update that fails and breaks something on the site, but in terms of your infrastructure and choosing the right type of hosting for your business, well, cloud hosting is now the clear leader for small businesses. As I said earlier, you can even sometimes get an advantage on the cost of your implementation of your website hosting. Well, what that means is because there's multiple websites on technically a shared platform, but with the underlying cloud technology below it, well, what that means is you can have high availability, affordable cost for your website, and low downtime and low problems with it. Now, we're going to take a quick break now. We're going to come back very shortly and talk more about the options with web hosting, how your website hosting speed affects your
To continue enjoying this presentation, download BRiN, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit BRiN.ai or search the App Store today.